Right. So Julian Assange, there is an update with his case, his battle against extradition to the United States. So if you recall, on January 4th, we had the verdict, and Judge Baretzer, she ruled in his favor. But it was a double-edged sword, because even though she said, okay, I'm not going to extradite Julian Assange to the United States because the prisons there are so bad, especially he would be, most likely locked up in a federal supermaximum prison. So, pre-trial, this would be in Alexandria Detention Center, and then post-trial, very likely ADX Florence. You go in there, you never see the sun again. And so there was a huge suicide risk, and that's why she decided not to extradite him. However, in regards to the political charges, the espionage and hacking charges, she basically agreed with everything. And so it effectively criminalizes journalism. Now, the United States, they lodged an appeal. Okay, so 2 weeks ago, Friday, you had the deadline, and the Biden administration, of course, they decided to appeal the decision. So they're essentially going to continue Trump's persecution and prosecution of Julian Assange, and they're going to appeal this, right? So essentially what they're going to have to argue in the high court in the UK is that, no, look, our prisons are wonderful. Why, Julian Assange would never kill himself. And whether a judge believes that or not, we'll see. Perhaps they end up making some diplomatic assurances or whatever. But, as I said before, you can go watch the interview with Neil Smeltzer, who's the special rapporteur on torture. Julian Assange, he's not going to be extradited alive, okay? And here we have a case update, okay? So we have a case update from Julian Assange's partner, Stella Morris, and this is the fundraising page, right? So just to briefly recap this for you, essentially, they've received an extension until March 29th, okay? And this extension allows them to prepare arguments for the High Court against this appeal by the United States. So that's one thing where they can argue that extraditing Julian Assange will be detrimental to his health. There is a huge suicide factor, suicide risk. However, on top of that, they're also contemplating lodging a cross appeal. Okay, so this is a tricky thing, because with a cross appeal, essentially what they would be doing is they would be going to the High Court and saying they're not okay with the judgment. And again, it's a double-edged sword, because the judgment is technically good for Julian because she's saying no to extradition, but it still criminalizes journalism, right? And it doesn't address those charges, the espionage charges, the hacking charges. It's just like, yeah, we're done with them, we're okay. No, it's not okay. So the cross appeal, they'd be able to appeal those political charges, but at the same time, it's risky because, if it doesn't end up going their way, I mean, and it gets overturned, it's a big problem. So, but that's not sure that they're going to cross appeal just yet. They're contemplating it, right? So the way it works, you'll have to present these arguments to the High Court, and then they decide whether they'll allow you to do that in the first place. And over here, she posts this case update. You can go and donate, by the way, if you'd like to. This is on crowdjustice.com. Okay, so it says here, Julian's extradition. I'll start from the top. So we wanted a UK court to properly quash the extradition and refute the other grounds too. We wanted a finding that the extradition is an attempt to criminalize journalism, not just in the US, but in the UK and the rest of the world as well. And that the decision to indict Julian was a political act, a violation of the treaty, a violation of his human rights, and an abusive process. Julian's extradition team is considering all these issues and whether they can be cross-appealed. The court will set the deadline for the defense to submit its response, and once it has all the arguments before it, the High Court will decide whether it wishes to grant permission for the appeal to be heard. Okay, so it's not a given. It's not guaranteed that they're even allowed to cross-appeal, even if they wanted to. Okay, so once again, just to give you an idea here of the conditions he's in, however, the most pressing problem for Julian is that conditions in detention continue to obstruct his ability to prepare his legal case, a case on which his life depends. He is denied proper access to his lawyers. His legal team is unable to do in-person visits because of COVID, and there are months of waiting lists for video conferencing. There are delays in legal papers reaching him, and the laptop issued by UK authorities for the court case is read-only. It has no text editing programs, and the keys are glued down to prevent him from typing. This makes it all but impossible for him to provide adequate feedback to his team with regards to the materials required for the appeals. So, I mean, we've known this for a while, right? That the way he's being treated, I mean, it doesn't even allow him to prepare a defense properly. I mean, what is that? How can you call that, open justice or, a right to a fair trial? It's not. It's really not. And they're treating him like he's some kind of terrorist. I mean, frankly, and it's absurd. It's frankly absurd. And this is, of course, just one among many affronts, And so, just to elaborate on that in regards to the treaty, there was a great piece in Consortium News about this. And again, we've talked about this before, right? It's that the extradition treaty between the United States and the UK, it says you can't extradite someone to face a political trial, okay? And that's been the tradition in the UK, for what it's worth. Again, to call the UK justice system fair is, nonetheless, if you look at the Extradition Act, okay, so that's the implementation of the treaty into British common law. Extradition treaty between the two countries, Extradition Act is in British common law. It's missing, right? It's missing this Article 4 about being able to prevent someone from being extradited because their trial would be political. It's not there. And so, it's you have this weird thing going on here where they're trying to use this treaty between the two countries, between the US and the UK, to justify this entire extradition process, right? And yet conveniently, the Article 4 is missing. This clause, this provision is missing in the Extradition Act in British common law, right? And so the judge is acting like it doesn't exist, like it's not there. And if you go back and you listen to some of the again, this is in the piece of Consortium News, they talk about how the original intent was not to leave this out on purpose. It was sort of a given. Like they assumed that, well, given the long tradition in the UK, it wasn't necessary to actually include that in there because it's obvious that you would not extradite someone to face a political trial. Now, whether you want to believe that or not is up to you. Me personally, again, this is just my opinion, but given the time that this happened, this is 2002, 2003. This is the war on terror was just started. I think they did that on purpose. I'm pretty sure they did that on purpose because they wanted to make sure as a personal favor to the United States that the United States would be able to extradite anyone they want. Right. And that's exactly you're seeing the effects of that, not just back then, but right now with Julian Assange. Julian Assange is just one example of that. Right. He exposed that the entire war on terror, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq was a farce. It's ineffective. It's killing tons of civilians. There's torture, kidnapping, rendition. And so, the extradition treaty was born during that period. And it's been used as a tool of that of this era that we're living in. Right. Now, so again, I think that was on purpose. I think they're very clever. These people are not stupid, but again, that's just my opinion. Perhaps it's wrong. In any case, it's definitely interesting that they're choosing to act like that's not in there. And not to mention, you have to consider that it's just one aspect, right? It's just one aspect of many other things. The guy's been spied on, so he's not going to be. Even under U.S. law, you have a right to due process, and under the Constitution, right, and the Bill of Rights, you have. Even under U.S. law, you would have huge violations just for the fact that the prosecution would have tainted evidence that they gathered while they were spying on him. So, again, we're going to be here all night if we go into all of the abuses of process, the violation of Julian's human rights. It goes on and on and on and on. It's endless. There are so many reasons why this case is illegal. But I just wanted to give you a quick case update on that because it is interesting if they decide to cross appeal it. And we'll see what happens with that, right? So deadline will be March 29th. And, just, again, you have to keep in mind, Julian Assange, he's not serving a sentence. He's not a convicted felon. He's just in Belmarsh prison, in a maximum security prison in London, because he's a political prisoner. That's the only reason, okay? And, the fact that you have a world-class journalist who exposed war crimes by the United States and their allies, and that he's being he's facing 175 years in jail, and this is happening in the middle of London. And, you know, the world is just kind of turning a blind eye, kind of completely turning their head in the other direction. It's astonishing. It's astonishing. You know, it really is in many ways. So there you go. Just a quick case update in that regard.